Good afternoon, Surrey Eagles fans. Marton and Charlie Black here outside the South Surrey Arena as the 2021 pod season presented by Shaw has officially come to a close. Charlie, was quite the month-long stretch that was endured by all these BCHL teams. What did you make of the pod season?
I barely remember the last 5 weeks. Everything went by so quickly. But it was a sprint, it was a marathon, it was a grind, it was everything all at once. In a year that we weren't expecting to have a season, we got something really special out of it. Yes, there's going to be a lot of question marks and asterisks that people want to throw, but end of the day, the Eagles finished with a pretty dang good record, and there's a lot to look forward to. So I'm happy.
17-2-1 for the BCHL pod season. That is the second best overall record in the league. They won the Coquitlam pod. They finished the season on a 13-game win streak, and that is where we'll start, Mr. Black, as we talk about the final 3 games with this Eagles team. As they faced adversity once, they nearly lost the win streak on a Friday night affair versus the Powell River Kings, but other than that, it was smooth sailing all the way out.
Start on the Wednesday, and it's a 6-0 shutout effort. Tommy Scarfonian getting his first goose egg of the season to match Prasma's goose egg. And, yep, we'll talk about that adversity because that same Powell River Kings team, they came back on in a big way for the Friday night rematch. But that one ends 4-2 in favor of the Birds. And that sets you up for a perfect final showdown against the Express on the Sunday. And it was all Eagles all the time. Even a little bit of extracurriculars at the end couldn't deter this team from just sailing right to the finish line, easy peasy.
And I feel for Tommy Scarfoni, who, in my opinion, probably should have finished this season with 2 straight shutouts. His shutout bid getting derailed in the last couple minutes in that game versus the Coquitlam Express. Austin Fraser getting the tally for Coquitlam. It was a 6-1 win. But we talk about the Surrey Eagles team, and we talked about before the season how good they could be. And I made the prediction that they would win at least 14 games, and they blew my expectations. They just continued to roll. It looked like as they got into the season that it didn't matter what the other teams would do. They just didn't have the depth to match the Surrey Eagles team. And that isn't something that's going to be a one and done here with this Eagles program. You have to think now that this is going to be a team that will be at the top of the BCHL standings for the next few years.
The quality of competition was there. There were doubts. Yes, we mentioned about Powell River being a wild card, but all of that was put to rest pretty quickly as the Eagles still managed to cruise to some very convincing, not necessarily easy, but very much convincing wins. There is always going to be the question of, well, what would this team do against the rest of the league? We will never know what this exact team would have done against, say, Penticton, but they certainly made that race at the end very interesting as the Eagles were, in fact, challenging for the top record in the entire league on the Sunday.
And part of that is due to the great coaching from Cam Keith, Brad Tobin, and this Eagles coaching staff, which will continue moving forward with the news that Cam Keith has signed a 3-year extension with the Surrey Eagles to continue building this program. And Charlie, it's been a minute since the Eagles have had a coach of this caliber to bring stability to the program. And after the season they just had, in which Cam talked about how this team could be a championship contender in a normal season, well, now he's got the opportunity to continue to build and continue to grow this program and get them back into the BCHL Fred Page Cup final, which hopefully starts next season.
The way that this team has progressed in Cam Keith's first year and now second year, everything is clicking into place very nicely. I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that Cam Keith is one of, if not the best coaches in terms of player development in the BCHL, in junior hockey, in the entire universe. Is that crazy to say? I don't think so.
Yeah, probably, but I mean, that's kind of where we're at, right? Cam Keith has done such an incredible job, and let's look no further than the leading scorer in the BCHL, and Christian Fitzgerald, who at the beginning of 2019 is brought on as affiliate player, who was cut by a team in the BCHL and was picked up by Cam Keith and developed into what looks to be an absolute stud and a player that might have potential to not just make it an NCAA Div 1, but further in his hockey career. Of course, I am talking about the young Christian Fitzgerald, who finished his season with 33 points to lead the league in scoring, was a monster on the power play, Charlie. And, not just him, but all of these members of this Eagles team. You saw great development from Jacob Slipik, who had career highs this year. You had Holden Catsley, who continued to develop. Brandon Sanawana continued to grow. Tate Ross and Tate Taylor, the two 16-year-old defensemen. Even Max Prasma, from where he was when he came in at the beginning of the training camp against Chilliwack, to now being a goaltender who arguably was at the same level as Tommy Scarfoni, who is now going to RIT. Like, there's so many players that have developed on this Eagles roster, and you look back at Cam Keith and Brad Tobin and the work that they've put in, and I'm very, very excited to see what he is able to do moving forward.
Cam is an incredible developer and identifier of skill, and he is an incredible motivator as well. Simply put, these players would run through a brick wall for him. He knows how to motivate his team. He knows how to get everything into the right spots. He's not afraid to play around with his lineup and move pieces around to see what's going to work. He doesn't get married to keeping the same players together all the time. He wants to see what's going to make each individual player better. Is it going to be this pairing, or is it going to be this line combination? He's willing to experiment and let that all develop. Especially you look at how he rotated through his entire lineup, resting key players at key moments to utilize all the depth that he had. Something that not a lot of teams did or could afford to do. And it's no surprise that players took another step under Cam Keith by their own merits of hard work and by what Cam and Brad brought out of them. And you bring up Fitzgerald as a perfect example. Went from starting the year last year as an affiliate player to, I now would not be surprised if Fitzgerald had his name called at the NHL draft.
Well, I didn't want to say it. I'm glad that you did, but that's enough about how excited we are that Cam Keith is coming back, and we hope that our Eagles family, friends, and fans of the team are just as excited as we are to have some stability behind the bench. But now let's talk about the player of the week in the final week of the BCHL season, and we have to highlight the 20-year-olds as they graduate their junior careers, and so we want to thank Eagles captain, number 7, Kieran O'Hearn, number 9, Tyson McLean, who had a hat trick in this pod season, number 11, Jacob Pillar, who showed flashes of skill throughout his campaign, number 26, Will Kushnirik, who scored a beautiful backhand goal on the power play in the 6-1 win. Holden Catsley, number 29, there's not much you can say about him. It really is where he is going to go in his hockey career as he's looking for a school in Canada. And then finally, number 30, Tommy Scarfoni, the RIT commit, who is this week's player of the week. He had to finish in style. He's got the shutout on Wednesday. Should have had a shutout on the Sunday afternoon affair on Mother's Day against the Coquitlam Express. And I mean, what more can you say about number 30, Tommy Scarfoni, and just how good he's been with the Eagles, not just this past week, but throughout his entire junior hockey career.
He's a stabilizing force on the back end for the Eagles, keeping them in games all throughout last season and this season that might have gone the other way if not for the amazing saves that he put up and his positioning, his awareness, his rebound control. I mean, every part of his game has come such a long way, was already strong, but got even stronger. So it's absolutely no question that Scarfoni is going to take this momentum and carry it forward into his college career next year with RIT. And beyond, it's going to be an absolute treat to see where he and all of our graduating players end up going in their careers. It was an incredible week, an incredible season, especially when you look at how that split was going. Hunter Tarvis got 3 games, but the rest of it was very evenly split. Scarfoni to Prasma to Scarfoni to Prasma, and each of those goalies held their own in a big way, but none had a bigger week than Tommy.
And so congratulations to Tommy Scarfoni, the RIT commit, who will move on with his hockey career starting next fall. It's been an absolute pleasure, Tommy, being able to call your games if you're watching. And thank you to all of our 20s who played their hearts out in this pod season and helped the Eagles kind of go on a run that saw them soar over the BCHL. And that
what you did there.
Yeah, thank you. That takes us to around the league here as the final week has come to a close. Some commitments have already been talked about, but we'll start all the way over in Vernon, as that is the farthest pod out east. as I kind of give myself a little bit of razzing there because I forgot geography last week. So we'll start over in Vernon, Charlie, and what do you got?
Well, Marcus Joggin was named the BCHL Player of the Week for our final week of campaigns. 4 games he played. He was held off the score sheet in one of them, but he racked up 2 goals, 8 assists, 10 points total in 4 games. Technically speaking, 2, 8, and 10 in 3 games. He had a monstrous week, starting off with 3 assists in a win over Salmon Arm. In another, he had 2 goals and 2 assists. He closed things out in a big way. The 19-year-old from Ontario made a massive case for Player of the Week, and I think it was without question. Though worth mentioning, Tommy Scarfoni did get honorable mention.
Did get honorable mention, but congratulations to the Warriors forward. But there's also some news from the Salmon Arm Silverbacks as the son of Mark Recchi, Cameron Recchi, has got an NCAA commitment. He will be going to St. Thomas. Ooh. So congratulations to Cameron on the commitment, as there will be more players around the league after this pod season that are going to make their commitments official, as I have no doubts that there will be more of those coming through the pipeline. And so congratulations to Cameron. Of course, Vernon did come out on top in the pod in Vernon. But now let's head a little bit more west. We're going to the Penticton pod. And, I mean, there's not much to say about what happened there. The Penticton V's best record in the league at 18-1-1.
The Surrey Eagles were challenging for that top spot in the league on the Sunday night. They were hoping for a Cranbrook win in regulation to help seal the deal. But, of course, the V's, we've said it before, they're a wagon, and they stormed to victory in a big way. They managed to lock down the top record in the league. But Cranbrook certainly make things interesting as we get to this final week of games. The Bucks in their expansion season, they had their growing pains, but I suppose the most impressive part was rattling off a 5-4 victory against the Trail Smoke Eaters. Trail team that was skidding into the final week. They managed 1 goal in their early week contest. They lost 5-4 against Cranbrook, who managed a hat trick from AJ Vasco. Big statement game there, as Cranbrook had erased a 3-goal deficit and then stormed back. Simply put, when Nick Sombrowski is on the ice in the last minute, things are going to happen. He's been very clutch for the Cranbrook Bucks, especially late in the stretch here. But Trail, of course, I mentioned they were skidding, and they ended up running into a Penticton team that smashed them 7-0. It was a rough start. It's not what they were looking for, but you know that a lot of the talent on that Trail team, they're going to rebound in a big way. Especially you look at Logan Turness in goal, and I got to admit, I got a bit of a bias. I'm a Connecticut guy. Am I excited by the prospect of being able to watch Logan Turness do Logan Turness things with guys like Hudson Shandor, Brandon Santawana, and Ryan Tattle in front of them? Yes. Yes, I am.
That'll be exciting, of course. And I kind of, before we move to the next pod, I do want to talk about Cranbrook a little bit more in the sense of this is an expansion organization who comes in first year and is forced to play 10 games against the Penticton V's. And that, you want to find out how to win in the league? That's the team to do it against. And while their growing pains you talked about are there, they did not have the season that I would expect them to have anticipated moving in their 2021 pod season. But you got to look at that coaching staff, and you got to look at what they saw and what they need in order to compete in this league. And, you know, I'm hopeful that Cranbrook is able to turn it around moving forward. And that's kind of my closing thought on the Cranbrook Bucks as their first season has come to a close. But now let's move, further west. We're going to the mainland. We're talking about the Chilliwack pod. And this was a 2-team race throughout the entire season. And I mean no disrespect to the Merritt Centennials, but the Prince George Spruce Kings and the Chilliwack Chiefs, they came to play. And it was the Prince George Spruce Kings with a huge 4-2 victory on the final day of the Chilliwack pod, coming away with the victory. And I won't say they surprised everybody. They certainly surprised me. I had Chilliwack winning that pod. I'm very, I'm excited that the Spruce Kings were able to kind of prove me wrong in that sense. And it all started with the fact that their goaltending and defense were absolutely superb.
Has anyone mentioned the fact that the Prince George Spruce Kings had 3 goaltenders in the pod season, and each of those 3 guys registered 2 shutouts each, and that Kobe Grant did not allow a single goal at all? That's crazy.
It's crazy.
Aaron Trotter, Jordan Fairley, Kobe Grant. That is... I'm without words.
It was one of the best defensive teams, I think, in the league. And that is a team that I would have wanted to see the Eagles play, or I would have wanted to see the Vs play, because that would have been such a different style. And you saw that in the Chilliwack pod. The Chiefs, they had injury troubles. And let's not give them an excuse, because every team is going to go through some stuff. We had a couple of injuries in the Coquitlam pod that we'll talk about. But, Chilliwack didn't have a lot of Massimo Rizzo. They were looking at him as being a key piece. Lachlan Getz was out of the lineup for a little bit. They did suffer with health in this pod season. But Prince George, Christian Buono, 27 points on the year. That's a fantastic 20-year-old season, and I got to expect he's going NCAA Div 1 in his near future. You look at Trotter. He had a .934 save percentage. He had an under 2 goals against average. Mason Wade had 19 points in 17 games with the Spruce Kings. They had some guys step up in a big way and really prove that they were a good team and that they should have NCAA Div 1 commits.
Let's come back to Christian Buono for a second, because those 27 points he scored in the pod season, what did that get him to? 100 career BCHL points. Congratulations, Christian Buono. That's not an easy thing to accomplish, and he managed to get there in a season like no other.
Yeah, so full credit to the Spruce Kings for coming out with the pod victory on the final day, and what was, in my opinion, the closest of the pods. It really was a 2-team race, and Merritt, unfortunately, being lumped into 2 teams that were above average for BCHL standards. That's just not a fun time for them as far as who they had to play. And again, I hope that Merritt is able to grow and kind of bounce back from the past couple of seasons as they try and rebuild their program and get themselves back to where they want to be. But full credit. The Chiefs and the Spruce Kings, it was fun to watch. It was fun to kind of watch from the outside, and I bet it was a lot of fun for all of the media members to be a part of.
It will be interesting. It will be interesting to watch the Merritt Centennials and how they respond in this offseason. They've had a rough skid of it, and they've announced recently that Derek Sweetcoulter, head coach and general manager, his contract's not being renewed. They're going to start with a fresh slate, at least for their bench boss. Who knows what that is exactly going to look like? Levi Stewart might factor in some way, shape, or form. He got his first head coaching win in the pod, stepping in relief. But they're going to be a team to watch this offseason. And I think that the name of the game is stability. They had Sweetcoulter was named their head coach partway through last season when Barry Wolf was relieved of his duties. So if they can lock down a Cam Keith type coach, that would be a huge get for the program and be able to solidify them for some time to come, because I believe the talent is there. There's a lot of really promising pieces. They weren't able to produce much. They generated offense, but goaltending wasn't quite enough. Josh Diaz played out of his mind on most nights, but they're going to look to really reinvent themselves, and I will be watching with great interest.
So that'll do it here for our coverage on the Chilliwack pod. Let's go to the only other pod that the Eagles weren't a part of. We're going to Vancouver Island for the Port Alberni pod, Charlie. And another close pod. I will give them a lot of credit. A game between the Grizzlies and the Bulldogs. It kind of came down to the wire, and which team came out on top?
Well, the Victoria Grizzlies were victorious as they closed out the pod season in a big way. Island Division champions. Big offensive performances from throughout the lineup. Ellis Rookwood stayed strong. He wasn't impacting the score sheet as much as he was earlier in the season, but he still stayed a major part of the conversation, especially against teams like Nanaimo, who just went surging through the final few games. If I may redirect a little bit, the Clippers, they had quite the offensive performance against Alberni Valley, winning 9-6. Former Surrey Eagle Liam Ryan, a big factor in those late wins as he comes on strong in his final year and final games of junior hockey.
Well, you want to talk about a team that came out strong, the Cowichan Valley Capitals, 100%. They made that kind of it was a battle for top spot between the Bulldogs and the Grizzlies, but it was a battle for third place between the Clippers and the Capitals. After the Capitals, they stuttered. They did not come out of it, as I call them, the Capitals. They kind of got clapped.
There's a bit of a stutter.
They kind of got clapped throughout the beginning of the year, and then they came out super strong at the final end of the season, and that's got to be some cause for celebration for the Capitals as they try and get back to where they were at the end of the 2020 playoffs when the season got shut down. And that team was well on its way to, battling with the Nanaimo Clippers and kind of trying to earn a spot in the Final Four of the Fred Page Cup playoffs. And then this year, they lost a lot of key pieces in the Perch in December when, the players were still waiting to kind of get ready to play, and some of them went to the States to play in the USHL or the NCDC, and the Capitals got hit pretty hard. And
not to mention the fact that they had they had a coaching change in the offseason, 2 coaching changes, in fact. Mike Vandekamp ends up in the Grand Prairie Storm, and then they bring in Jeff Grimwood, and then he's quickly replaced by Brian Passmore, who now has to work with what he's got and say, what is our identity? How are we going to work with this? And then on top of that, you're losing players like crazy. But they storm into this pod season. Well, not storm into, but they storm out of the pod season. They doubled their wins. They rattled off 3 straight, made things interesting, and a lot of that comes off of the goaltending of Lucas File and Jaden Schull. So I think there is the possibility there, because the last thing you want to see is a BCHL team do poorly. You want to see everyone do well, but I still say it's not too much of a stretch that these Capitals, they're building on something, and I think especially as you see some of the offense waking up, especially Sean Ramsey, another former Surrey Eagle, making an impact.
So that'll do it here for our Around the League coverage as the Island Pod. Congratulations to the Grizzlies on their victory. And that takes us to the Coquitlam Pod. And we've talked a lot about the Eagles. Christian Fitzgerald led the league in scoring, 33 points. Brett Bliss had 19 points on the season, a bunch of those coming on the power play. We can talk about this Eagles team for days, but let's really kind of give credit to where credit is due. The Powell River Kings, they were your call for wildcard team, and they end up finishing second in the pod season in a year where, they struggled down the stretch as they were the only team in the Coquitlam pod that had to kind of travel and stay in the area in hotels, and it looked like it was kind of getting to them there near the end, but they were able to be competitive against Surrey in their final games and not so much against the Coquitlam Express.
They toughed it out, but at the end there, you started to see things really settling in. Fatigue, you could say. Depth was an issue, especially because they played so much of their games without Thomas Wardle in net or Nick Porchetta up front. Those are 2 crucial contributors that they were able to power through their absences at first, but started to skid a little bit at the end. They still came on strong and still put on some really good performances, but you just wonder if maybe things might have gone a bit differently if they had Wardle and Porchetta, or one of those 2 for a little bit more games. Coquitlam, they came on in a big way too. They were surging. They were really pushing hard for that second spot. They brought it. They absolutely brought it to Powell River, 8-2. And they showed, hey, we're not done yet. Don't write us off. So I think there was so much excitement at the end. And it closes out the way we expected it would, the Eagles finishing on top. But that race for second got a lot more interesting. And it wasn't until the Eagles were able to put away the Express that Powell River was able to hang on to second in the pod.
Well, and I think part of that too, we talked about how the Eagles were able to rotate players through. They cycled through their entire roster. They, I don't want to say they didn't care about winning, but in a lot of my conversations with Eagles head coach Cam Keith, he talked about this was a development year. It was mainly for the rookies. It was to get his veterans some scholarships, get them to the NCAA Div 1, and develop his rookie players for next year. Whereas Powell River and Coquitlam, they tried to win every game, and they tried to put their best roster out, and there were players that got hurt. We talk about the injuries to the Kings, but let's not forget the injuries to the Coquitlam Express. They lost young forward number 20, Ryan Williams, who started the year on their top line and was a very strong young player for them. They lost Colton Kovic, an experienced defenseman, for a while. He missed, I'd say, most of the pod. Mm-hmm. They had stretches where they didn't play with Christian McDougall. They had stretches where they didn't have Tattle in the lineup. Like they battled as well through injuries, and I think it's good to understand that, with those 2 teams, with the Kings and with the Express, both not having the depth that the Eagles had, it really did make it interesting. I think both teams kind of played to the same, not advantage, but the same level as far as they lost key players. And it was a battle of who wanted it more, and I'll give the Kings full credit that they were able to really kind of put themselves in a great spot heading into the final week where the Kings struggled. but ultimately they had built themselves enough of a cushion that it didn't end up mattering.
Another team to look at for the offseason, Coquitlam has just announced their new head coach, Brandon Shaw, coming over from the Alberni Valley Bulldogs, where he served as an assistant with Joe Martin, filling the same role as well when they were previously with the Merritt Centennials. He's going to have an uphill battle to establish what Coquitlam Express hockey looks like, but he's the guy for the job. He's well equipped, and I think especially depending on what returning pieces you see coming back, because keeping in mind that Tyler Schleppe, for example, was a big part of their offense, but he does in fact return on loan to the Langley Rivermen after all this wraps up. So you got to wonder, do you get another year out of Ryan Tattle, or is he heading to the University of Connecticut? If you get Tattle back and you can figure out what's going to happen with your goaltending, what's going to happen with your defense, because I think they have some good pieces in place. You build that out, and I think the Express can find a way to carry some of that late momentum that they had against Powell River and do something with it. But the biggest question marks are going to be, how is the new coach going to set his team up for success? What is goaltending going to look like for Coquitlam? And these are all questions we don't have the answers to yet, but we will, again, be watching with great interest as the carousel continues on. Merritt and Coquitlam having changed coaches, that might not be the end of it. We might see a couple other vacancies throughout the league, and there are familiar names that might come up in conversation. There are some new names that might come up. It's hard to say, but we'll be keeping an eye and seeing what happens, because this is where teams can really make or break themselves for the future. I touched briefly earlier about Merritt looking for coaching consistency, and none more so than when they had Joe Martin not that long ago. I would love to see something. I'd love to see them get that same consistency back.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what the offseason's all about, isn't it? Is trying to figure out who's going to get their program sorted and who's going to improve and what's going to happen. I mean, I know the Eagles are going to improve. I know that Cam Keith is staying with his 3-year extension. And that's going to do it here. Charlie, Flock Talk presented by Telus. It's been an absolute pleasure to be able to bring it to Eagles friends, family, and fans all season long. But that's it. We're done. We're done. Season 1 is in the books.
Oh, hey, we're done.
We're done. Yeah, take that puppy off. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I also want to thank Telus for their support of the Eagles through the 2021 pod season. It's an absolute pleasure to get to work with you. I hope that relationship continues moving forward. And with that being said, Charlie, it was an absolute pleasure being able to do this show with you. I hope it continues moving forward in the next year. One final time here, Cole Marton, play-by-play broadcaster, Charlie Black, the man, the myth, the legend for the Surrey Eagles himself. And I want to thank Underdog Production for all of their support and bringing all of the games inside the 2021 pod season in Coquitlam to all of our viewers at home. I think they deserve a shout out as well. That's going to do it here. I hope everybody watching has a great summer. And finally, I hope you all have a great rest of your evening.
We out.